Hello everyone and welcome back to ToowerGate. It is day 138, July the 21st, 2017, Friday. Alright, that's fantastic. We made it to Friday. Anyway, I told you yesterday I had something pretty cool lined up for today's video. And it's based on a story that was put together by the Daily Caller. Who does some pretty good work. They're not exactly on our team, let's put it that way, but they do have some decent reporters and they do some pretty good work over there. So I do get some of my material from there. But they did a really good story, and it's what it does. It kind of takes excerpts from the New York Times and the Washington Post, which to the Daily Caller, these are the sources of record, and it kind of takes a look at these stories and it puts everything into a timeline. And by doing so, you can really get a pretty clear picture of a case that the writer is trying to make in this Daily Caller piece, which is that he thinks this is evidence that shows that the Democrats cooked up the Trump-Russia conspiracy theory. And he lays out these New York Times and Washington Post stories and puts a timeline to everything, gives you some background to it, so that you can kind of, so he can make the case for this. And keep in mind, this is all based on the official narrative that the Russians hacked the DNC. Now, as most of you know, I do not believe that the Russians hacked the DNC, the DCCC, or anything else. It's possible. I could be wrong, but I believe that the leak, I believe that it was a leak and not a hack, and I believe Seth Rich was the leaker. That's just what I believe. I could be wrong. But to me, that seems a lot more likely than the official narrative. But keep in mind, for the purpose of going through this Daily Caller piece, it is working from the idea of the official narrative of Russia hacking the DNC. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this part of it today, and then part two, Saturday evening's video, will be kind of a follow-up to this video, where I will kind of interject other information that I think is important that probably should be a part of this Daily Caller piece that's not, because it takes you away from the official narrative. So it's kind of approaching it from two different ways. Today, kind of going through the official narrative, although there are times through here where I'll point out some point of disagreement that I have, but it's the timeline that's important in these activities. And then Saturday evening, I'll take some of the other information that's not included in the Daily Caller piece, I'll factor that in, and then from there I'll offer some analysis on what I think is probably the most likely scenario that we're looking at for what happened. In general, I agree with the premise that the writer is making, that there was, that this is a setup, that it's something that was cooked up a long time ago, and that it's just playing itself out. I agree with that, but I depart from him on the idea of the fact that the Russian hacking is real. I think the caller is making the assertion that the Russian hacking is real, is true, or what have you, and I disagree there. So anyway, I'll depart from that, but I'll mostly focus on that tomorrow. So for today, I just want to go through this Daily Caller piece with you, go through this timeline and these events and these things that happened, and I think that you'll see where it does certainly look like, as the writer is pointing out, that this entire conspiracy theory was created, and this is basically a psychological, political type operation that's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now I am going to provide the link for this article, this Daily Caller article, in the description below if you want to read it for yourself. But I'm going to go ahead and go through the highlights of it and lay it out for you, make a few comments. Then tomorrow I'll do the Saturday evening video where I'll factor in some other things that are not in this article, which I think are pertinent, and then I'll offer my analysis based on that. Okay, so here we go. As per the Daily Caller article, he's talking about the fact that this past Saturday, which would have been last Saturday, the New York Times published a story that provides some facts that make a very strong case that the Democrats and their allies created the Trump-Russia conspiracy. The Times lays out, the New York Times he's talking about, lays out the timeline of events, particularly from April to June of 2016, and that there are three main events that took place. And these three main events are that, number one, Trump wins the Republican nomination. Number two, Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC learn that their systems were hacked, which they say was done by Russians. And number three, the Democratic operatives hire Fusion GPS to conduct the opposition research on Donald Trump. So let's go through this timeline and break it down a little more carefully. So on April the 26th of 2016, Trump sweeps Connecticut, Rhode Island, Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and therefore declares himself the Republican nominee. That was April the 26th, 2016. A week later, approximately, May 3rd, the GOP chair, Reince Priebus, basically declares Trump the nominee after Trump wins Indiana and Ted Cruz drops out. I'm sure we all remember that. Next, we have the Republican donor that was paying Fusion GPS discontinues because Trump gets the nomination, and Reince Priebus has said, okay, that's it, it's over, Trump is the nominee. So at that point, the Republican donor that was paying Fusion GPS basically discontinues paying GPS, and that's all for them. And so Fusion GPS at this point goes looking for Democratic donors who will continue to pay so that they can continue to do the opposition research. And keep in mind, as I mentioned in the dossier video, this is consistent with what I said in the dossier video, that after the GOP money ran out, Fusion GPS went looking for Democrat donors to continue what we know was somewhere in the range of $12,000 to $15,000 per month, plus expenses that was being paid to Fusion GPS for this opposition research. So now we get to June. And in June, the Washington Post reports that the Democratic National Committee had been hacked, apparently by the Russian government agents, and a mysterious figure calling himself Guccifer 2.0 began to publish stolen documents online. Now, this article opined on June 14th, 2016. Now, what the Post did not tell you in that story was that the DNC knew that the Russians were behind the hack, and that it took place as early as March or April of 2016. So this is the first major point that he's making, that there's something going on here. He's suggesting that as soon as the Democrats bring GPS Fusion on board, that Guccifer 2.0 starts publishing. And they also announced the fact, make it public that they've been hacked. But keep in mind, as this piece is pointing out, the Democrats knew that they were hacked and that there were attempts at breaching their system multiple times back as early as March. Some even suggest as early as February of 2016. So in other words, they didn't come out and actually talk about the fact that they were hacked or go public with the fact that they were hacked until after Trump had won the nomination, and until GPS Fusion had contracted with some Democratic donor to continue the opposition research. And only then, after Guccifer 2.0 comes into play, and then the Democrats come out, and Democratic National Committee comes out and says, yeah, we've been hacked, and we were hacked by the Russians. So this is the first flag that goes up. Now, the New York Times reported that the Democratic National Committee leaders were made aware of the hack in late April. But of course, we have other sources that put it earlier than that. Now, the New York Times reported that the DNC had hired CrowdStrike within 24 hours of learning about the hack. This is very important. And even more importantly, is that after only 1 day of examining those servers, CrowdStrike determines that the intrusion was perped by the Russians and that the attack had originated in Russia. Now keep in mind, one of the owners of Fusion GPS is essentially a Russian who despises Putin. He is an Atlanticist. And we know that other work that they have done always points the finger at Russia. So this is something to keep in mind as well. But it's just extraordinary to think that CrowdStrike would be hired to look into the server, and within 24 hours they've completely gone through the entire server and determined that it was the Russians. That seems very, very hard for anyone to believe, that anyone could perform a forensic analysis on a system, which probably the amount of data that would be in that system and what you would have to go through to try to figure that out, to be able to do that in 24 hours is, again, it's something out of a spy movie or a spy novel that you just wouldn't believe. So, based on the Times and the Post reporting, the DNC knew Russia was behind the hack of their network on May the 1st, 2016. And based on the information that has been reported by the Times and the Post, we have the following timeline to consider. So now I'm going to lay out a series of dates for you, and I think you'll see what the writer is referring to and why it caught my eye and why I think that this is pertinent to the overall story. Even though I don't agree with the Russian narrative, I'll offer something tomorrow in addition to this story, which I think when you put the two things together and then look at it, it looks even more different. But the timeline is very, very important, and that's the main focal point of this video and this story. So let's go through it. Again, just as a timeline. April 16th, 2016, Trump declares himself nominee. April 29th, 2016, DNC learns its network was hacked. April 30th, the very next day, the DNC hires CrowdStrike. Late April, early May, Democrats, or some Democratic donor, begin funding opposition research with Fusion GPS. May 1st, CrowdStrike determines Russia perpetrated the hack. May 3rd, 2016, Reince Priebus declares Trump the GOP nominee. June the 9th, 2016, Donald Trump Jr. meets with Natalia Veselnitskaya at the request of Rob Goldstone, who is believed to be, and now known to be, a Fusion GPS operative. June the 14th, 2016, DNC publicly discloses that Russia hacked its networks. So now when you look at these events, the way they play out, it certainly looks like the Democrats knew that they were hacked, and according to the people they believed, assuming this is true, that the Russians were the ones hacking it. And then, but it wasn't until after Trump clinches a nomination, and more importantly, it wasn't until after the Democrats get together with GPS Fusion that all these other events seem to take place. Almost like they're creating these events to set them up so that down the road, as they develop this narrative, which they're going to create, they create the narrative, then they're going to have all this stuff already in the can, which they are going to begin to drop, which is then going to begin to look like evidence to support their narrative, which is exactly what we have seen. So, the DNC refused to disclose that Russia hacked its network for a month and a half, and only disclosed it after Fusion GPS brokered the meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and Natalia Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer. Now, it should be a point of note that in both of his statements, Donald Jr. said that he never was told the name of the person with whom he would be meeting, let alone that it was a Russian lawyer with possible ties to the Kremlin. This is what Donald Trump Jr. is saying. This suggests that Fusion GPS was involved in a dirty tricks campaign that sought to question Trump's loyalty to the country by portraying him as having close ties to the Kremlin, a tactic that has emerged as a primary point of opposition to then candidate Trump and now President Trump. These revelations bring to light the likely involvement of Democratic operatives in fomenting the Russia-Trump collusion conspiracy theory that has now become the subject of a federal and congressional investigation, which has had a negative effect on Trump and his ability to meet his legislative agenda. So, the fact is, the DNC knew but kept secret the fact that the Russian hacker was responsible for their computer breach at around the same time that the Democratic operatives began funding Fusion GPS, who would then broker the meeting between Trump, people in Trump's inner circle, and a high-profile Russian lawyer. This all appears very sinister and, at the very least, warrants an investigation. Exactly what the Daily Caller is pointing out is what I've been saying, what I've been, to an extent, again, I go in a different direction. I don't buy into the Russian hacking, and I'll go into that on tomorrow night's video of how I think that actually plays in to this story even more. The Daily Caller is running this from the idea that the Russian narrative is true. But regardless of that point, the bottom line is that when you look at the timeline of events as to when the hack occurred, and then you look at when Fusion GPS began their relationship with whoever this Democratic donor was, which we don't know now, but we can assume it's someone close to the Clintons, certainly with the knowledge of the Clintons, that as soon as GPS comes into the picture is when all these events happen. Right afterwards, immediately after GPS comes in. Pretty soon, we get the narrative that, oh, within one day, CrowdStrike is hired. The next day, they determine that the hack was Russian. And then a week or two later, you get the meeting that's set up between Trump Jr. and the Russian lawyer. And it begins to look like, when you lay it out exactly as the author of this piece in the Daily Caller states, which is that it looks like a setup, which is the point that we've been trying to get at here for a long time. It's just interesting that he would pull together the New York Times and Washington Post stories in order to reach this conclusion. Something I'm pretty sure that the Washington Post and New York Times are probably not happy about if they read the Daily Caller piece. And keep in mind, the Daily Caller is not a pro-Trump site or anything like that. So it's it's something certainly to be considered. Now, here's a couple things that I would also throw into the mix that have not been considered in the Daily Caller piece, that were not included, which should also be figured into the timeline of events. And one of the most important ones to me will be the murder of Seth Rich, which occurred on July the 9th. Now, let's plug that date back into this timeline and see how that looks. April 16th, 2016, Trump declares himself nominee. April 24th, the Democratic National Committee learns its network was hacked. The very next day, April 30th, the DNC hires CrowdStrike. The very next day after that, CrowdStrike comes out and says it was the Russians. Then you get on May 1st, of course, that was the day that CrowdStrike comes out and declares a Russian hack, one day later. Then you get on May the 3rd, Reince Priebus, of course, declaring Trump the nominee, which was pretty much already known by the DNC the week before, just as Trump declared himself, but Priebus waited till the Indiana race till he made it official, because by then it was mathematical. When Trump said it, it was 99% sure. A week later, after the Indiana victory, it became a mathematical certainty. Then we get June 9th, we get Don Jr. meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya at the request of Rob Goldstone, who is believed to be the Fusion GPS operative. Now, that's what it says in this story. But now we know that Rob Goldstone is a person who collaborates with Fusion GPS and is familiar with them prior to all of this. So we know who probably put Rob Goldstone up to making that phone call. We're going to learn more about that in a minute. Now, let's plug into that. July 9th, we get the Seth Rich murder. Now that looks a lot different, doesn't it? When you plug Seth Rich's murder into this timeline, you begin to open up an entirely different door in a new room, which opens up many other doors. This totally throws this theory. It works with the timeline. It works with most of the narrative, but at this point, the Seth Rich murder kind of takes the Russian narrative it doesn't take it out of the equation. It just changes the way that you have to analyze the so-called Russian involvement. And I'll be getting to that tomorrow, so just be patient with me on this. And I'll tie it together for you. So then June 14th, the DNC publicly discloses that Russia hacked its IT network. So now that when you plug the Seth Rich murder in, we get something altogether different. And tomorrow I'll add some additional information to this from what we've learned recently, which is not mentioned in the Daily Caller article. And I think it's when you take that information and you put it together with this Daily Caller timeline, which is based on Washington Post and New York Times articles, then you get to see an even different picture, a more intriguing picture, and I think a more realistic picture. Now, the hacked emails first reported on the media appear to reveal that officials were discussing Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya just a few days before her meeting with Trump Jr. This source was from a cache of files taken from a State Department official. The files show 3 photos of Veselnitskaya's house. This was triggered by Bill Browder, this UK businessman we talked about in the last 2 videos, contacting a House committee staffer whose name was Kyle Parker. Okay, so this is some new information that has recently popped up. Apparently there's been some more hacked emails that have come out, and this story is reporting, it's being reported by many major media outlets, that apparently this deal with Natalia Veselnitskaya and this Mr. Browder, as I talked about yesterday, this feud they have going on, apparently officials prior to the Trump Jr. meeting with Veselnitskaya, prior to that meeting, Veselnitskaya had already come up on the radar screen of State Department officials, and we can assume that would include the FBI, because the FBI essentially does the investigative things for the State Department. So we can assume that the FBI was contacted, or actually what happened, as it says here, is this Bill Browder went to this House committee member's staffer, and he gave them this information, which he apparently forwarded to the State Department, which led to the FBI to take a look at this information. And so what we learn is that before the Trump Jr. meeting with this Russian lawyer, the State Department, by way of the FBI and Mr. Browder, were already looking into Veselnitskaya, and for some strange reason, included in these files that that the reporters have looked at or have heard about, they were looking at photos of Veselnitskaya's house, as well as discussing her activities, which had a lot to do with this lobbying and for the Majinsky Act. Now, we had learned just about a week ago that Veselnitskaya was very, very busy, very, very active in Washington, D.C. and in New York, meeting with over 200 members of Congress. And her number one beef, of course, she's working for her client, is to get this Majinsky Act reversed, while at the same time Mr. Browder is pushing and was the reason that the Majinsky Act was passed in the first place. Now, we also learned something else, is that Veselnitskaya's translator in the Trump Jr. meeting was Anatoly Sarmacharnov. That was her translator, because when she got together with Donald Trump Jr. to have this meeting, she brought a translator. And this man was Anatoly Sarmacharnov, who was her translator. He was also a former employee of the FBI. So now we're learning about the fact in the last couple days that there was 8 people in this meeting, and every day we learned there was another person or what have you. Well, we now know that this 8th person, who he was, which is being reported in all the newspapers today, and they're trying to find more conspiracy there. But the one thing that I haven't heard any of them mention about this man was the fact that he was a former employee of the FBI. And the fact that his name is Anatoly Samachornov tells me he's probably Russian or Ukrainian or something. He's certainly East European. So we now learn that Veselnitskaya's translator in the Trump Jr. meeting, who was there to translate for her, was former FBI. Another red flag goes up. And it almost puts in my mind, the first thing that pops in my mind is, wait a minute. What kind of connections are going on? Because now this is starting to tell you that there may be some connection going on between GPS and the FBI, or GPS and the State Department. Certainly, we know that GPS is connected to the DNC. We know they're connected to CrowdStrike. And we know that these were all groups who were working on behalf of the Democratic National Committee in the Hillary Clinton campaign. And we know who James Comey was trying to protect. And we know who Loretta Lynch was trying to protect. When you throw all these people together, you know, Fusion GPS is not just some outsider. And if this man who was in the meeting, who was there to be a translator, we find out that he's former FBI, how does that fit? All these things matter. These are not incidental details. They're all things that need to be looked into. Now, something that's kind of a rumor going around now on some of the intelligence websites is that there's kind of a whispering campaign going on within the FBI and the intel community that suggests that the emails sent to Trump Jr. were very carefully worded, and worded in such a way to create a basis for a FISA request to surveil and unmask the Trump team. This is exactly what I said in the video before last, 2 videos ago. I suggested that when I first read that email, when Donald Trump Jr. released all his emails from these conversations, and I read that email, the way it was worded, it was worded in such a way that it said the same thing to me, like screamed at me. It's like, it's worded in such a way that it's trying to, there's a purpose for the way this email was worded, and the way it was done to talk about openly in the email. Because even Mr. Goldstone would understand that this is not, you know, especially knowing that all emails are collected by the NSA, you know, why you would put that in the body of the email, why you would even do this with an email, and why you would say that there was information and it's from the Russian government. It's just the whole way it was done. Doing it by email, including in that email the fact that the Russian government, I mean, it's just, this whole thing stinks. It looks so much like a setup. You could only say it was either a setup or these are some horribly incompetent people. But when you look at who Mr. Goldstone is hanging around with, when you look at who's guiding him, these are people in the intelligence community. These are people with ties in the intelligence community, ties to people in all various areas of the government. This is simple, you know, this is very simple stuff. I mean, these are not mistakes that they make. You know, you don't send an email to set up a meeting like this. First of all, you wouldn't do it by email or by telephone or by any electronic communication, and you sure as hell wouldn't word things and use the phrases and state things like the Russian government has information or whatever. I mean, this is, it just doesn't fly. Again, it all looks like it's from a bad spy movie. And again, as I said about a week or two ago in another video, that if this meeting that took place was the reason that they were able to get the FISA warrant to conduct the surveillance on Trump and his team, then that blows this thing completely to smithereens. Because now, as I'm saying, this looks like a big setup. Well, if in fact all these people were part of this plot and this setup, and this was all done, it was all done to get the FISA warrant so that they could launch the surveillance and later the unmasking, which they would then spread. I mean, it's unbelievable. Just with what the Daily Caller is putting out, just the way the Daily Caller is putting this out there, even though I don't agree with the Russian narrative of the Russian hacking, all these other things add up to it's a major setup. There's absolutely no question about it. What I'm going to do tomorrow night is throw something else at you that I think even closes any other loopholes that may exist in this. And I hope that this is where we're going to eventually end up, is that we're eventually going to learn that this is exactly what this was all about. If we ever get to the bottom of this, I think that we're going to learn that this was a gigantic political operation that involved the Obama administration, the Hillary Clinton campaign, the deep state, the intelligence community, and going back to what I said from day one on my very first ToowerGate video, much bigger than Watergate. This goes everywhere. It leads everywhere and to everyone. So, I should also mention one other thing in the timeline, that the WikiLeaks released the first of their emails on their WikiLeaks email releases on the Clinton DNC, DCCC emails on July the 22nd, about two and a half weeks after Seth Rich was murdered. And if you take a look at the timeline and plug that date into the timeline of July 22nd, you can see where that fits in. It fits in as the campaign to paint Trump and Russia as being colluding. It's right in that, same range, within a couple of weeks of that same range of everything. Now, I don't think Assange is part of the plot, but this certainly fed into the narrative. Certainly they knew that their system was hacked or that something was leaked. So all that really tells me is that they knew that there was a breach in their system, and they knew that this was somehow going to come out. So they probably sat around and strategized and says, uh-oh, this stuff's going to hit the fan. We have to position ourselves in such a way that we can play this off as best we can to our benefit. And so this is why I think that they probably really started pursuing the Trump-Russia and tying Trump to this, to the leak or to the hack and to the release, the WikiLeaks release. So this is very interesting to look at this in a timeline situation, looking at the dates of how these things all transpired and where they've led to today. And now that we are where we are today, we can look in retrospect and we can see how in the rearview mirror it becomes pretty clear that this was definitely a political operation. And I think we're going to continue to get more and more, and I think it's going to become obvious to probably even to the mainstream media at some point. If this continues, it's going to become obvious that this is exactly what this was. That this entire thing was nothing more than a political operation that was being run during a election year. And of course, when it didn't pan out and it didn't manage to defeat Trump, they were left with a very, very big problem, which is that they now didn't have Hillary in there to cover all this up. So the cover-up had to begin. Problem is, they don't control anything in the government anymore other than having Obama holdovers in there releasing things, having Comey and Brennan and those people who are now gone. But certainly this would explain a lot of the things that we're seeing as this story plays itself out. So tomorrow I am going to bring in some additional information that's not from the Daily Caller, but is from new information that we've gotten over the last week, 10 days, in regards specifically to whether or not the Russians were behind it, or whether it was a leak, whether it was Seth Rich and all that type of thing. And then I think that will give us a different perspective, and I think it really plays into the Daily Caller story. Obviously, the reporter isn't going down that road. He's kind of working from the official narrative. I'm going to take it into sort of an alternative narrative, but it still plays in perfectly into the narrative. The only thing that's different is instead of blaming the Russians for the hack, I assert that it was a leak and it came from Seth Rich and possibly other people as well. So anyway, this is pretty much what I wanted you to take a look at today. Again, I'll provide the link for you for the Daily Caller piece so you can look at this for yourself and read it for yourself. Click on the link in the description below the description. You can find the link and you can read it for yourself. Sometimes I think it's a little easier to comprehend things when you can read them than having someone kind of tell it to you. But this is basically what the narrative is saying. So this is kind of part one of 2 parts of this video that I'm going to do for today, Friday, day 138 of ToowerGate, July the 21st, 2017. So I will be back with you tomorrow, Saturday evening, for my late Saturday evening video, for those of you who can stay up that late. Otherwise, I guess you watch it on Sunday morning. And although I might get it uploaded earlier, it's just hard on a Saturday. But anyway, I'll be back Saturday with like part 2 of this, and I think when we plug in some other information, I think we'll really see exactly. It's really becoming much clearer now to me, and I think this article and looking at things, putting it into a timeline, I think really helps you grasp, because you get so many facts and so much information coming out, and if you can't put it into a context and into a timeline, it all becomes to kind of run together. So by putting it into a timeline and putting things into context, I think that the picture becomes much more clearer, that we are in fact looking at a political operation, and one that went terribly wrong. So by the way, and one other note, as far as we know, Samantha Power has not backed out yet. She is expected to testify, I assume, if they don't give us a day, but we know it's got to be within the next 2 weeks. If not tomorrow, if she did do it today and it doesn't happen tomorrow, which would be Friday, it'd be today for you guys, then it almost has to happen next week because they're running out of time. But there's something else that I discovered that I did not know about Susan Power, is that she's married to Cass Sunstein. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Cass Sunstein, but he is a crazy son of a gun. He's an ultra left-wing liberal, and he wrote a book that was very controversial a couple of years ago called Nudge, where he makes the article, and his training is in the behavioral sciences, and he makes the argument that that the government should run heavy-duty propaganda campaigns and mind control. He's a big supporter of government mind control programs and propaganda programs to get the people to believe what the government wants them to believe, and that they're better off believing in a lie given to them by the government than to know the truth. Mr. Sunstein believes that you would be better off as a citizen of the world, regardless of where you live, to be fed a bunch of lies by your government and to believe them. That you'd be much happier and much better off as the government lies to you about everything they do. This is who Samantha Power is married to. He was also one of Obama's advisors on environmental regulation and policy. So, and he's regarded by liberals as being this icon. So Cass Sunstein is married to Susan Power. Holy smoke, man. It's just unbelievable. I mean, the more you learn, the more you learn about this, it just makes you shake your head and it's just extraordinary. It just never ends. It just never ends. Anyway, thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate the comments, watching my videos and everything. And it's just great that we're following this story. I know it's frustrating sometimes. We're, at day 138. We're not even, halfway to a year yet. And imagine how frustrated, people, particularly Woodward and Bernstein, and their editor must have been at the Washington Post back during the Watergate scandal. That went on for 2.5 years. Can you imagine for 2.5 years being able to stay on a story like that? It's amazing, but that's my intention on this story. And if it takes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or 100 years, and to the day I die, I will continue to stay on this story until we finally understand it, understand the truth about what happened, and hopefully see justice for those who took part in this unbelievable effort to destroy a president and do great harm to the country and get away with a horrible crime, which I believe involves the entire deep state, the intelligence agencies, political parties. Unbelievable. The media. It's almost so big it's hard to wrap your mind around it. But we'll keep doing that. I appreciate you tuning in. I'll be back Saturday night with the part 2 of this with some additional information. We'll try to tie it all together and hopefully make this story a little bit clearer for all of us to understand exactly what did happen. Thank you all for tuning in. Good night.